Regina, for opening today's event with your wisdom and your prayer.
We are honored to be here today. My name is Justine Stillborn. Some people call me Teeny.
And I'm Sarah Cronin.
I'm the Marketing Communications Specialist for FHQ Developments.
And I'm the Indigenous HR Strategy Consultant for Takata HR Solutions, a division of FHQ Developments.
And we will be your MCs for today's event. FHQ is proud to host today's Indigenous Economic Development Forum in partnership with our companies and our nations.
The theme of today's event is cultivating economic resilience through collaboration and aims to bring two worlds together, Indigenous businesses and non-Indigenous business leaders.
Today's event aims to support partnerships and business opportunities with non-Indigenous organizations to join the efforts of economic reconciliation.
So let today be about cultivating prosperity to economic sustainability, connecting key stakeholders and business communities with Indigenous businesses, and to share economic and investment opportunities together.
I would like to now introduce File Hills Qu'Appelle Tribal Council Chief and FHQ Development's Chair of the Board of Directors, Jeremy Forhorns. Good morning.
Good morning to everybody. I want to first thank the elder for the words spoken on all of our behalf. I want to welcome you here to the Indigenous Economic Forum that is hosted by FHQ Developments. I want to acknowledge the 11 First Nations that comprise our tribal council. Starting in the west is Niigaaniit First Nation, Wood Mountain Lakota Nation, Pie Pot Nation, Muscopetang Soto Nation, Pasqua Soto Nation, Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation, Pepeeksies Cree Nation, Okanese Cree Nation, Star Blanket Cree Nation, Little Black Bears Band of Assiniboine Cree, and Carry the Kettle Nakota. Those are the 11 First Nations that make up our tribal council in southern Saskatchewan and comprise roughly about 18,000 members total. So FHQ Developments was developed and built on the urge of our 11 leaders who come together and wanted to build a common or a shared entity with common goals. Each of the communities has challenges and struggles in regards to business, getting into business, engaging with business, maintaining relationships with business, as well as simply operating and running a business. Those challenges are there and those challenges are real. Even after 10 to 15 years, there are always growing pains with business. And that's what we're here today. That's why we're here, is to learn about those things, to better ourselves. And granted, when you engage and work with a First Nation, it's not simple. It is complex. It is complex because of how First Nations are structured. It's not necessarily structured as it would be for a non-First Nation business. There are other relationships that have to be considered. So you do have to work with leadership, which is chief and council of our nations. You do have to work with the people of the nations and have a rapport with them. And which is why at FHQ Developments, we always encourage business to go out there and engage directly with the First Nations. We want to facilitate that part of the discussion also. We want to learn from you as well, the staff at FHQ Developments and the team that we have there, which, by the way, I also want to acknowledge and thank, because until late yesterday, they were here setting all of this up, putting in that time. So to our team at FHQ Developments, if we could give them just a little round of applause. Especially over the last little while, just because of the transition phase that we're going through. And as we look forward to the future to build a strong foundation and to refocus and re-engage with our own communities, as well as with business and the corporate sector out there. There have been strides made. Strides have been made on the corporate side of things for inclusivity, finding ways to better include First Nations business and entrepreneurship, but as well as to sustain that, a commitment to sustain that long term. But there is a lot more that we know that needs to be done. We all know that there needs to be a lot more of that built in and a lot more consistent relationship building. Because, you know, it is 2024. We've been a long ways from certain mindsets and all of that other stuff. And I believe we're always capable of more. You know, there are things that we can take piece by what we hear every day. But as was said earlier, every one of us has a choice. Every one of us has a choice every day in what we want to be a part of and what we want to help contribute to and build. This is an example of that, why we're here this morning. So on behalf of our 11 nations in Treaty 4 territory, which there are 34 nations in Treaty 4, Southern Saskatchewan, as well as part of Manitoba. 7 reserves in Manitoba are a part of Treaty 4, and the other 27 are in Southern Saskatchewan. So in this territory of Treaty 4, we welcome you. We welcome you here to collaborate, to network, to build new partnerships, to start new partnerships, even friendships. Even if you come here and you got a new friend, that's a win. No matter how you look at that, that's a win. That'll lead to something down the way, whether it's business or even personal. That's still a win. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending our forum, for supporting the forum, for coming here today from wherever you are, Manitoba, Alberta, or from our own province here. I want to welcome you and thank you for supporting us. And I hope that everyone has a good day, safe travels back home, wherever you're from. We do hope that, because we do want to see you back here next year as we continue to learn and grow, as we continue on this path to facilitate a business road to our nations. And whatever we can do to help you, to help ourselves, and to help those that we serve, that's what we want to do. So with that, that's all I want to say right now, and I hope that everyone has a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Tribal Chief Chief Four Horns.
We have included all speakers, moderators, and panelists' information on your agendas at your tables and online. So as we begin each presentation and panel, we'll skip the introductions so that we have as much time getting into these discussions as possible.
Please note all information regarding the day is available to you on the FeedLoop app. So this includes the schedule, speakers, sponsors, and sessions throughout the day, as well as the agendas on your table. You should have received an email with a link to the app in your inbox. We also want to mention that you can share any pictures that you take from the day to our memory keeper, which will allow all of us to see the pictures from today. The QR code can be found in your agenda.
I would like to introduce Sherry Daniels from ISC, our presenting sponsor, to address the crowd.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the elder for the great words this morning, and it's excellent. And thank you, Tribal Chief Forums, for the opening comments. We're very happy to be here today. It's an honor to be here in Treaty 4 territory, the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation, to bring greetings on behalf of Indigenous Services Canada. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous peoples and communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I would also like to recognize and thank FHQ Developments and the Planning Committee and the MCs this morning, who have done an excellent job in organizing this event. With the theme of, and I hope I get this right, cultivating economic resilience through collaboration. So that's an excellent theme, and I think really sets the stage for this day. It's encouraging to see so many people who are focused on this same goal of discovering and exploring potential economic development opportunities in investment and businesses while collaborating and creating valuable local, provincial, and national context and networks. You'll see as you get older, it seems like I'm saying a lot, but the font is just really big. So it's actually not really a long three-page script here. With this, we have resources available for 5 economic development funding streams. We have our team, we're kind of in the little back corner there, but I encourage everybody through the networking and things to stop over and learn more about some of the programs and services that we have in the economic development avenue. And I won't lead through all the acronyms because it's, government, we have all these little things, but we certainly, I'd want to go through them all, but certainly if you have business ideas or anything like that, we certainly would love to chat with you with the breaks. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about what our core prioritization framework program, it supports construction ready projects related to acquisitions, startup and business expansions. And the Strategic Partnerships Initiatives program aims to increase Indigenous participation in complex economic development projects by leveraging the efforts and investments of multiple federal departments and provincial and industry sectors, including clean energy initiatives that can look at power generation projects, behind the meter opportunities, and workforce training. So the SPI initiative for Saskatchewan is one that just actually kicked off this last fiscal year. So certainly encourage anybody. I know there's a lot going on in the green energy for the communities around here. So certainly encourage we're trying to partner with the province and other federal programs, kind of one stream of funding and get those projects off the ground. So really encourage you to, if you're interested in those, to speak to our team as well. We have our SPI guy, called Kevin Lysak, in the corner there. So maybe he'll just give a little wave there. So it's through these funding relationships, we've come to know and understand better the business pursuits in which Indigenous communities are involved and the key people who drive this business forward. Indigenous economic participation is paramount to reconciliation, and by working together, we can support communities in achieving self-sufficiency and socioeconomic goals. Our regional economic development team provides resources to support, develop, and grow Indigenous economic development activities, and I encourage you to contact us. And then they wanted me to also give you some websites, but we've got the information there. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to today's.
Thank you, Sherry. So we're going to get on to our first presentation, A Guide to Effective Grant and Proposal Writing by TJ Haywahe of File Hills Capel Tribal Council, to share his insight on best practices to ensure your proposals and grants stand out.
So TJ will be delivering a presentation on effective strategies for persuading the evaluator to award the grant to you. So this opportunity requires you to skillfully present yourself, your personality, and your brand, illustrating compelling reasons why your project, idea, or business stands out. So TJ, the stage is all yours.
Ambawashte. Sorry about that. I'm not used to such a large clicker. Usually I have a little tiny one in my hand here. So, all right. So Ambawashte dokinya uhihe. Bichongpi mani nichiapi. Shega king hetibihe. So good morning, everyone. My name is TJ Haywahe from Carry the Kettle First Nation. And today I'll be presenting on effective guide to grant and proposal writing. Sorry, I'm just trying to. That should be better. All right. So with that, I noticed a lot of different professionals in the room from different industries, right? From construction to mining to engineering. And also we have a lot of different entities and corporations within the room. Many of you I've sat with, engaged with in various capacities. In my previous life, I was the Indigenous procurement partner for the city of Regina. And I'm sure I've engaged with a lot of you in that capacity. So moving forward, I'm now with the File Hills Capel Tribal Council and working in the best efforts of our 11 member nations in regards to traffic safety and community well-being. So today, let's get the show on the road. So a grant and well, I don't have a screen, so I'm just going to follow on my cell phone. I forgot to make myself a copy. So, all right. So, like I introduced myself, I'm from Care to Kettle. I have 2 daughters, Caitlin and Casely. My youngest daughter is Casely. I'm holding her there. And my oldest daughter is Caitlin, who's 11 years old. I'm very passionate about equine therapy, land-based learning, and ensuring that my children have an opportunity to learn from the Western perspective as well as from our traditional and cultural perspective. There's a quote that always resonated with me, and it comes from Tatanka Yuatanka. He said, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we will make for our children." So when I look around this room, I see a lot of change makers, innovators, people who come from industries who can affect not only your Western world, but affect my traditional and cultural world at the same time. The theme for this conference or this workshop is building collaboration or partnerships. But in my language and in my understanding, we call it taking of relatives or making of relatives. So today, as we move through, if you just pay attention to the board here, it's kind of out of the box approach that I'm taking. A lot of us write grants and proposals for various industries when we're writing for not-for-profits, for corporations, for private industry, for First Nation governance or governments, municipal, provincial, federal entities. So there's all different approaches and tasks to take. But today I'm just going to give a general synopsis from my perspective and my experience that I've seen as being a procurement partner, reviewing RFPs, RFQs, as well as going through the proposal and grant aspects. Sorry, how do you back that up? Okay, so here, sorry, I'm just slow on my phone. So here we're going to talk about the cultural respect, the collaboration, holistic perspective, cultural empowerment, making of relatives, cultural metrics, outcomes, environmental stewardship, sustainability, language, and adaptability. So cultural respect, learn about the culture, the traditions, language, and the community values when you're engaging or for whatever capacity you're working with that nation. Use inclusive language. Stay away from the word I. From our First Nation standpoint, we're team players. We're communal. So when we work together, everything's done together. Everything's done transparent. And then also be mindful of how language is used in all aspects, spoken or written. If you're from the Western world and you're working with a First Nation entity or First Nation community, be mindful on how you present. Language does matter, and approach does matter, tone does matter. I've worked with a lot of various entities and a lot of Western business, and when I've engaged with them, they've always approached me, of course, professionally, respectfully, but at the same time, when we would actually talk business, it was almost like I was being talked down to in that sense. But at the same time, I did forgive them because they don't know my world as much as I don't know their world. So that's why when we're talking about working and using language, it's very important that we use proper language. And then also avoid stereotypes. One community is very different from another community. The tribes in BC are very different from the tribes in Ontario. The tribes in Alberta face very different socioeconomic issues than the tribes in Saskatchewan, but we all have commonalities when it comes to economic prosperity and sustainability within our communities. So now we look at collaboration. I believe it's on the board. So consult community members, elders, leadership throughout the process. As Tribal Chief Jeremy Forehorns mentioned earlier, we are a communal people. So when we engage with our nations, we engage our elders, our children, our stakeholders, our shareholders, as well as our urban and on-reserve membership. And we have to ensure that the proposed project aligns with the community's priorities and values. Just because you're coming in from that Western perspective or from that outside world into the nation or into the First Nation entity, it doesn't mean that you've got to bring your worldview along with you. When you're entering into business with a First Nation entity or nation, it's always good to sit down and break bread, as they say. Sit down and get to know, build that relationship, have those conversations, have those hard conversations, because those hard conversations is what is going to solidify your relationship moving forward. And a part of collaboration comes funding. When we look at funding, we always seek out the primary 2 entities, provincial and federal, because when a lot of First Nation communities apply for grants or proposals, usually CIRNAC, Indigenous Services Canada, or even large corporations or entities such as Potash, Mosaic, stuff like that. So we want to ensure that we're applying or approaching the funder correctly. So when we're working collectively together, we want to ensure that we're approaching the right grant or proposal, because a lot of our nations, they bring in grant writers, proposal writers, and then they come in, they fill in or they check the boxes. They're sweet and concise about the language, but sometimes fluff is good. Fluff helps tell that story. So as we move on, we look at that holistic perspective, the interconnection of social factors, health, spiritual or sacred sites, medicines, animals, harvest plants, history, and the earth. So when we're writing these grants and proposals with First Nation communities, all these are considerations. You may not consider them yourself, but in my world, we have to consider them because we live on federal lands, and on our federal lands, we've protected and we have identified sacred sites, medicine areas, traditional areas, harvesting areas, and also we have burial sites and those sites that are very significant to us. So whatever project or endeavor you're embarking on, if it involves the land or the resources from the land, then there's also different processes you also have to follow. So you have to think outside the box. You have to emphasize how the project recognizes and highlights these connections. So when you're writing, always be mindful of the community, the nation, and the entity that you're writing for. If you're writing for a daycare, of course, we all know it's very different than writing for a high school. If you're writing for school bus funding, it's very different from writing for project management funding. So we have to be very, very alert when we're writing and ensure that we're being inclusive in all aspects of our fundamentals. So now we move into cultural empowerment. Can everyone see that? Cultural empowerment. So capacity building, individuals, community leadership, governance, development, economic self-sufficiency, etc. So when we look at cultural empowerment, when we're writing these grants, we have to keep these in the back of our mind at all times, because when we're doing these processes, we want to ensure that the skills and the abilities stay within the community. So when we're asking for or writing for administration funding or governance restructuring funding, we want to ensure that our technicians that we're bringing in or that we've consulted with are have a sustainable long-term connection to our community, not only come in, do the 1 month contract and then they're out without turning back or following up with the nation in that regard. And then we want to that preservation aspect of language, practices, traditional arts, land-based knowledge. It's all a part of that cultural empowerment in those processes. I know many of you are thinking, what's this guy talking about? Culture, tradition when it comes to grants and proposals, but this is the perspective that many First Nation individuals and communities come from, that they carry. When I was working at the city of Regina, and when I was engaging with many entities, crown entities, provincial, federal, interprovincial, national entities, they all had that same question. What do your people want? What do your people value? And I said, well, you don't ask me. I'm just one individual. Ask who you're writing for, who you're working for. Engage the people that you're working with. Follow up with them. Build that relationship. Sit down. Take 10 minutes out of your day. Have some coffee. If you have an opportunity, attend a traditional ceremony or practice. So those are some of the little insights when it comes to that cultural empowerment. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm on topic here. How am I doing for time? Okay, so now we talk about partnerships or making our relatives. So relationship building and being genuine about your commitment to the community's well-being and by being a good relative. So always be truthful. Always be open, honest, transparent in your process at any level that you're working with First Nation entities or communities. Because if you're not open or transparent, there's going to be a lot of naysayers and there's going to be a lot of turbulence as you work through the project. Then collaborate with existing partners, community organizations, like-minded projects, and think collectively. Like it was mentioned earlier from Hushi Brenda, she talked about collectively working together. And in the comments we heard this morning about building those relationships and cultivating those sustainable long-term relationships. Then another factor that we also have to look at is the cultural metrics and the outcomes of those grants and those proposals. So tailor the metrics to align with the conventional standards, Indigenous values, and worldview. So a lot of people are always wondering when it comes to what are your expected outcomes? What are you trying to address, or what are you trying to assist with or develop? But at the same time, those are questions within the box. In First Nation communities, we always have to outsource and think outside the box based on our limited funding our limited opportunity when it comes to grants, proposals, and applications of such. And there's also limit, or I should say, the Indian Act does restrict certain aspects of business when it comes to how we process things and how we build partnerships or MOUs. Anyone have any questions so far before I move on to this from this part? Because when you move into the cultural metrics, we have to define what success looks like together. Usually it's one-sided. From some of my experiences and perspective is that a lot of individuals and communities shared with me that when they're working with a writer or a consultant, that the consultant writer comes in and kind of bulldozes them and says, this is how it should be done. This is what I've seen. This is how we do it, which is great that they're providing that their experience and their perspective, but at the same time, they're not there writing for themselves. They're there for the community and for the betterment of the entire nation, right from the elders, children, and right to the urban membership as well as the on-reserve membership. And then we have to capture the quantitative and qualitative and cultural data to capture the holistic impact of the project. I know many of you are thinking just quantitative and qualitative all the time, but from our perspective, we have to ensure that that cultural and traditional data is also collected. So when we're talking about the project, we have to look at the ecosystem, the environment, being a good steward to the land, being a good relative to our neighbors, and being truthful and transparent in our whole entire process. So as we talk about environmental stewardship and sustainability, we look at land use, the natural resources, and the land use sustainability in the projects, community ownership, control, and to have lead decision-making in the project, and reflection of the interconnection of the land, people, animals, and the plants. And then some of the questions that should come to mind is the project short or long-term? Does it provide sustainable employment capacity? Are the skills remaining in the community? So these are at the back of pretty much every person's mind when they're writing these grants or proposals, and also from the funder standpoint, and also from the writer standpoint. Everything has to be considered. When I was working at the city of Regina, when I read the RFPs or RFQs coming in, some of them you can tell were great storytellers. They shared a great start to finish, and they not only did they highlight the good, the bad, but also their outside budgets, their outside funding sources. But there was also RFPs and RFQs that I reviewed that they just put data in to fill the box or just to fit the box. And then those are two different perspectives. I've sat on various adjudication committees. I've had various opportunities, and whether you believe it or not, I wrote my grant, actually my first grant 20 years ago, almost to this day. I don't look like a old man up here, but I was 18 years old when I wrote my first grant to SPRA, Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association. I initially wanted to do a TP teaching at the First Nations University since I was entering my first year of university there. Because when I attended university, they didn't have TP teachings. There was just the foundation of the First Nations University was being, I guess, developed when it comes to introduction to students. So I went to SPRA. I believe Damon Badger Height, if he's in the room, but he was one of my guides in that aspect. He kind of led me through that process, writing it and then submitting it. And if you believe it or not, I actually got the grant. It was for $80,000. And I was like, what's this, totally blown away? I was like, what am I going to do with $80,000, right? But then I realized it's not mine. It's the collective, because I didn't write that alone. I wrote that on behalf of the students from my faculty of science at the University of Regina, because we wanted to ensure that we can use the traditional ecological knowledge as well as that Western approach in medicine and have a safe space for ourselves in the lot or in the green, because there wasn't a lot of Indigenous students within that faculty at that time. So as we move on, language. Oh, sorry. Language, sorry, I double clicked it. Like I said, I'm not used to such a giant clicker. So you want to be clear, concise, and plain language. And like I said, fluff is good sometimes, because from an Indigenous perspective, and being the month of February, we're in storytelling season. So having the ability to relay and convey the thoughts, the perspective, and the needs of the community is very important in your whole process. You want to incorporate traditional language and translate that language, because things do get lost in translation. Many of our communities throughout Saskatchewan, especially the Northern Cree communities and Dene communities, use their language 100%. English is something considered very foreign. I went up to Black Lake about a year ago to do a presentation. When I walked in, I introduced myself in my language. You can see the people nodding. Then I started talking English. Then some of the people kind of were taken back. So then one guy put his hand up. I said, yeah. I was like, yeah, what's your question? He said, I have a question for you, Tim. He's like, do you not speak Dene? I said, no. He's like, well, half this room don't know English. So that put me into a realization that we have to be mindful of the communities we're working in, be mindful of the language that we use, and be mindful of the approach that we're using within various First Nation communities. Because we have to ensure that the community is included in every crucial step. Community feedback in relaying appropriate cultural data is important through that whole entire process of language. Then we move into adaptability. So adaptability, being flexible to evolving circumstances, cultural or chaotic. Because in First Nation communities, we honor the spirit when it comes to funerals, when it comes to coming of age ceremonies, when it comes to rites of passage, and when it comes to ceremonial season. In our lives, that is utmost important to us. Before we do any type of business, we ensure that our spiritual side is covered in all aspects. And then you just want to be open, but with boundaries. Many First Nation communities have a lot of wants and a lot of needs. And as a writer, sometimes you have to kind of put your foot down and say, well, we have to talk about what's realistic and what's just a dream at this point, or a future aspiration that we can build into the 5-year or 10-year or 15-year business plan or whatever model that they're working with. And also we have to be adaptable to our urban membership as well as our on-reserve membership. We have to include all of our stakeholders, like it was mentioned earlier. Our band members are our stakeholders when it comes to our business developments or our business entities. So we always have to ensure we have their support and then to build that rapport by community give back, by supporting their initiatives, and by also donations. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll be floating around. And again, enjoy the day and thanks again.
Thank you, TJ, for that informative presentation. We appreciate your insight and your guidance on how effectively to submit grant applications and proposals. There are a lot of opportunities for Indigenous peoples through grants, even more so if you are a woman.
So speaking of which, we would like to introduce our first panel, which is all Indigenous women who are here to speak on Voices of Sovereignty, Indigenous Leaders Shaping the Future of Business. So this panel is moderated by Lori Campbell, with panelists Jennifer Harper, Dana Carrier, and Michelle Brooks.
Join us for meaningful insight on how Indigenous leaders are influencing our economic landscape. Lori, we hand it over to you. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Hello. Okay, I'm on. Test.
Yeah.
We're just gonna get Jen Harper is going to join us virtually, but I'll start us off. Tansei, Kakiao, Nawakamaganatik. Good morning, everyone. We're still morning, yes. Welcome all my relations, and thank you for joining us for this very special panel here today. I want to thank Cook and Brenda for starting us off in a good way, and I have the honor of listening to Cook and Brenda at many different events, and I'm always just blown away by her words and how they always seem to tie in very specifically to whatever gathering it is that I'm at for that day, and I just appreciate that, and I appreciate just kind of how that sets me off in a good way to want to walk forward in a good way throughout my day. So thank you for that, Cookham. So today we are joined by three phenomenal Indigenous women who are leaders shaping the future of business. Michelle Brooks, here to my left, with Brooks HR Group, who I have come to personally know over the last few years here from within our community. And one of my favorites, who has opened up a coffee shop here in town that I try to frequent regularly as one of my favorite coffee shops. So thank you for that. Jen Harper, who's joining us virtually. She is the CEO and founder of Cheekbone Beauty. And welcome, Jen. Glad you're able to join us. We can see you here in the room. I don't know that you can see us, but we can certainly see you. And we also have Dana Carrier, who teaches at Edwards School of Business and who is well known for her pivotal work as an Indigenous engagement strategist. So it's really my honor and privilege to be able to moderate this conversation among these three amazing business leaders this morning. And to kick it off, first, I'm going to invite each of you to share just a little bit more about yourselves, so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better. And then we'll get into some nitty gritty about leadership and what that looks like and how it's impacted you. So first, maybe we'll start with Michelle.
Okay, thank you so much, Lori. And thank you, Cook and Brenda, for the words this morning and for the advice outside. I think you said don't clench your teeth or you'll be bouncing up. Is that what it was? So yes, I'm Michelle Brooks, and right now my career has taken a totally different path. And when I was working in the Crowns, I thought I was going to retire there. And people would say, you know what, you change your career. I can't remember what the number is, maybe like 10, 20, I don't know what's the number, Lori, but, and I said, no, I'm going to retire in this position. But now I own a coffee shop. So it's a coffee lounge, an event center, and it's more than just that. For me, it was important to be an Indigenous female business owner in a district that isn't traditionally an Indigenous business area. So the Warehouse District, it's a cool, amazing environment. And I wanted to have a space for Indigenous people to come in there, feel welcome, be served by someone that looks like them. And just, it does advance reconciliation because it's bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together in a social space. And it's been going very well. When I hear that Indigenous laughter over in the corner, it just warms my heart. So Venue B Coffee Lounge, do not tell my staff that I have a Robin's coffee here today. I just happen to not be able to head to the shop. Other company, you can give me the hook if you want. Other company is Brooks HR Group. And so with that, if any of you know a little bit about me, I am really about advancing Indigenous employment throughout all levels of your corporations. So I find a lot of folks are in entry-level positions or, not up in the C-level positions. And so that's really what I'm trying to do. I have a couple of passions. One is that. Another one is being a female Indigenous entrepreneur. Again, I didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I'm loving it. And then the third thing is honoring my dad's legacy by, he's not here today and he went through residential school. So I want to keep his legacy moving forward and try to advance relations between policing and First Nations.
Wonderful. Thank you for all that, Michelle. Dana, could you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you bring here today?
Awesome. Well, thank you all for having me here today. I came here from Saskatchewan last night, and FHQ Developments has taken good care of me. So thank you again to FHQ Developments, and happy to be here with these wonderful women on this panel this morning. So my name is Dana Carrier. I'm Swampy Cree Métis. My family's from Cumberland House, so not from around this area, a little bit more northern, and member of Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. And I don't know about me. I've been like a leaf in the wind, kind of going to different jobs, doing wherever the wind blew me. I would take that degree, take that job. But where I am now, I wear many hats like Michelle. I am a faculty member with the Department of Management and Marketing at the Edwards School of Business. I know we have some Edwards alum here, so that's great to see. And actually wear two hats in that job. I'm also the strategic advisor of Indigenous engagement. So we haven't done, too much in the area of Indigenous engagement. So when I came in, we're kind of in those first steps of engaging with our own internal Indigenous community, our students, our staff. I'm the only faculty member right now, and also looking to engage with our external community as well. So that's one job. Outside of that, I am the Indigenous engagement lead with Accelerate Her Future, and we do have some mentors and fellows who are a part of that program. It's who are here in this room with us. It is a career accelerator for Black, Indigenous, and women of color in the areas of business and tech. So in my spare time, I guess that's what I do. And I guess third hat, I am also a artist and entrepreneur. My husband and I have a small business, not to the level of Michelle's or Jen's, but turned a lot of our things that we did as a hobby, sewing, beadwork, painting, other kinds of crafts and things like that, turned it into a business as people wanted to start purchasing our creations. And, you know, like Michelle, I'm not even wearing anything of what I made. I'm always wearing other people's work to share and promote them. So maybe we need to do a better job of that. Hey, bring our own coffee and wear our own clothing that we make. But yeah, so I wear a few different hats, and maybe I'll have an opportunity to share a little bit about each of those throughout our questions today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dana. So I'm noticing a theme here, and I'm pretty sure that Jen isn't going to break us from that, but that there's a lot of hats that Indigenous women entrepreneurs wear. But Jen, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Ani Boju, thank you so much for having me with you all today. I really regret not being able to make it there, but sometimes travel takes us in so many different directions and it's hard to be everywhere. It's wonderful to meet you, Lori, Michelle, and Dana, and share this space with you. So I founded a company called Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics, and it is literally built on this idea or this mission of helping all Indigenous people see themselves. You know, at the time when I had this crazy dream, actual pop out of bed dream to start the brand, I never felt like we saw ourselves in sort of mainstream media or we were represented in a good way. We always were on the news and our stories were negative. And I felt like it was an opportunity for a brand or a business to take ownership of who we are and where we come from. And, you know, much like the gentleman that was speaking before, understanding and really trying to share that we're not just this pan idea of Indigenous people as well, that we come from so many different cultures and backgrounds. And it all stemmed from just this idea about representation. So that's why the brand was founded. Fast forward to where we are today, I'm really open about sharing. I feel like I never know what I'm doing. Like, I did not come from the beauty industry. I was selling fish at the time of that dream, and had been in the food industry. So I really appreciate anything in the hospitality space, including the coffee shop that I hope to visit one day. But I feel like it's so important for us as entrepreneurs to share that idea of possibility, that you don't need to know everything and that you're going to learn and you're going to make all kinds of mistakes. And so I always think that's really important, but took these concepts really of how we make and create products. So the Cheekbone from the beginning, those first few years, is absolutely a different brand and business that we are today. However, that why we exist, that concept about representation and representing our people in a good way, has never left. We just literally changed how we make and create products. And so on this path and coming into an industry, not knowing anything about it, really opened up my eyes to seeing room for change. One, the beauty space is like notorious for waste. All of the things we buy, where they're made around the world in countries that don't care about how they treat their people or employees or the ingredients that they're putting into products. There were so many reasons and spaces where we recognized, okay, we could have this opportunity to actually use ancient Indigenous wisdom, our ways of knowing and being, that our people, you know, we know globally have been the ones protecting the planet or talking about how we should be doing a better job of this, and that we're not just here as humans to extract, we're here to give back and ensure, like, we were created to actually take care of this place. And unfortunately, we've globally have done a horrible job at that. And so as a brand, how could we then develop and work on this idea of creating more products that were better for people and the planet? And we've proudly been able to do that. I always like to close with, there's no endpoint to sustainability. So this is a path and a journey, and we are learning as we do that, but we certainly will try every opportunity to do things better. We launched an entire collection of items that are refillable, and, you know, we don't know if that's the right answer, but we're going to try everything and sort of peek down all the avenues. And we look at it this way. We're like, if you look to nature, everything is done perfectly. Even when sort of the waste or leaves fall off trees, we know that that then becomes incredible nutrients for our soil. And we use this concept called life cycle thinking or analysis from the beginning when we started this path to developing products. And that means that you look at the harvesting of raw ingredients to the end of the life of a product, which just doesn't include the formulation, but also includes the packaging. And our goal as a business is not to have anything end up in a landfill. And we then work backwards to figure out how can we make that happen, or what choices do we make in terms of packaging. So it's been quite the journey. And for many years as a solo entrepreneur, and then even building a small team, we're very, very small. Anyone that comes to work at Cheekbone Beauty, they're always like, oh wow, there's only like 7 people here doing all of these things. And I love that they think that they're many times they call us especially the new employee, they're like, oh wow, we thought the company was just like so much bigger. So we're like a small company, but like with big company energy. So I'm always like, no, we're not that big. Like there's still so much work to do, especially being in such a massively competitive space as the beauty industry. But I'm really proud to lead this organization and hope that we can make a change, not only in the beauty space, but then stay so true to our principles and values, which come from our Anishinaabe teachings, the 7 grandfather teachings. We built the business based on those teachings. Every company has core values. We're like, why don't we use our Anishinaabe ones to build this brand?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jen. Now, you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering, like, the path to leadership. So, like Cook and Brenda said, like every day we have a new morning and we have things to be grateful for. And at some moment, there was a day when you got up out of bed and you're like, today's the day I'm taking that step. Like what was that like? Like, what was that next step to leadership that kind of took you from having a thought to actually putting things in action? And granted, I'm sure on that particular day, you weren't branding yourself as a leader, but clearly that was a step towards the leadership. Dana, did you want to start us off on that?
Yes, I can, Lori. So this is kind of an interesting question. And, I thought about it in advance and kind of put some notes. And, one of the things I asked myself, did I plan to be a leader? And I think, I don't think I had that moment where I woke up and thought, okay, Dana, you need to be a leader. You need to step up and do these things. I think I've just had to, because one, I think I've been very privileged that I've been able to get a post-secondary. I have three degrees, so certainly I have the education behind my name. I've always been academically strong, and I think also because of my fair skin, I've been able to get access to opportunities as well. And maybe sometimes I was a checkbox hire or a token hire, and I really hope that I've been able to get all jobs that I've had because of my own merit. But I do know that this is something that we face as Indigenous people, and especially as Indigenous women. We check 2 boxes for a lot of organizations. So, I think I've been privileged in the education I've had, the work experience I've had, and often I look around and, it's just me. I'm the only Indigenous person. There might be some other woman, but it's the only Indigenous woman. So it's either me or one of few. So I think over time, I've just had to become a leader and, be that voice, because I've been privileged to be able to get into organizations and get into educational programs. And, I have to use my voice and take up space, which is always hard to do as Indigenous women. And I think part of our conversation will be talking about some of those barriers. So I can share a little bit more about that when we get to that. But, in any role that I've been, I try to make the best of it. Is it easy? No. And I think we'll probably hear that from Michelle and Jen as well. It's not easy to be in these spaces, to maybe be the first Indigenous person in the classroom. I mentioned I'm a faculty member. I teach. The course I teach is actually Indigenous Business in Canada. So I actually talk about many of you, the leadership work you're doing in the communities, the businesses you have, the partnerships you're creating. I actually, talk about many of you in my classroom. So, I look at you as leaders and look to you and talk about you and the wonderful work that you're doing. But for some of my students, I'm the first Indigenous person that they have ever had as a friend, that they've ever had as an educator. And sometimes I'm the only Indigenous person they've ever met and spoken to in person. So those are some big shoes to fill. One, being a leader, I think, in the classroom, in the workplace, and then also as, you know, an entrepreneur as well. Lots of space for Indigenous women to take up. And those are some big shoes to fill for us who are able to get in those spaces and have the strength, I think, in teachings of our culture and our community behind us as well. And if you had met me when I was a little girl, so shy, so quiet, when I first started university, if I was in a class and there was a participation grade, I'd be like, give me a 0. I'm not speaking in front of anyone ever. This is not something I'm willing to do. But I eventually just started putting myself in situations. I signed up as a teaching assistant, a research assistant, put myself into situations where I would take on a little bit more of a leadership role. I got involved in student leadership when I was a graduate student. And that really helped me, I think, find my voice and realize that I have something to offer. I have something to share. And I think that's also part of our teachings as well. There isn't really any hierarchy in our communities. And I know in a lot of organizations, there is hierarchy, right? You have all these positions, you move up the ranks and all these things. And I've tried to not, you know, let that hold me back in anything I've done. And I think my voice is just as important as someone who's making, you know, $100,000 more than me or whatever it might be. My voice matters. So I guess that's been my path to leadership, is just to rely on my teachings, you know, the strength of my family, my community, and our values as, you know, Cree people, and not be scared. And, you know, oftentimes I'm looking around, it's just me. So I have to be that leader and I have to be that voice. And, you know, I have to be there to kind of carve that path forward for, you know, the next Indigenous person to come behind me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, you know, for any young Indigenous person out there, and in particular Indigenous women, you know, knowing that, you know, there is room for your voice and the voice needs to be heard, I think is some really good messaging. Jen, did you want to share just a little bit more about sort of your path to from how you went from fisheries to I'm going to have a, you know, you know, the business that you're in?
Yeah, well, I think delusion really comes to mind first before that. Yeah, just being incredibly passionate. And I did this a lot in the early days. I was really on my own, but gratefully come from an incredibly supportive family and a group of friends that really helped me foster the dream to build this and turn it into what it is. Leadership is interesting because I really do believe that we all are leaders and have the ability to be leaders. We make that choice almost every single day of what kind of person we want to wake up and become. But when we then find ourselves in these positions where I think, you know, the world at large is now calling us leaders, and you're like, oh wow, I'm a leader. How did this happen, and how did I end up here? And it is very challenging, you know. Sometimes I've learned that it's almost, I know you have to really learn when to use your voice and then when not to use your voice. And sometimes not using your voice actually requires so much more strength than using my voice in our case, because we're faced with a lot of negativity sometimes as leaders. And the toughest part of this role that I've been given is dealing with the team of people that you hire and you're working with and you're trying to make it work. And so I don't feel like at times that I'm the best leader. Like I really want to learn how to do a better job. And so I'm always seeking. I feel like I've always put myself in this role of a lifetime learner. Like if there's a book on leadership, I'm like grabbing it and like, what can I do better? Because I feel like I honestly do feel like that's the toughest thing that I've been faced with is trying to be a better leader. And realizing that people really do learn from example, and discovering that, as mentioned from Dana, like sometimes you're the first in these situations. And in particular, I know I'm in a safe space here, but working with larger retailers like Sephora, like why aren't we in the Sephora in Regina, right? And having these conversations constantly with them about where we should be, and they're the ones in control. However, you know, I do have to use my voice, but then do it in a very strategic way as to not ruin a relationship. And the reason what stops me from saying all the things that maybe I want to say at sometimes is the fact that knowing, okay, maybe we're the first Indigenous brand that Sephora has worked with, but I don't ever want that to be the last, right? And so how I work with them is so critical and so important. And that's why we as a brand rely heavily on our community to help us get into more spaces. And I'm like, anyone that's in a Sephora and we're not there, I'm like, please go ask that manager, be like, why don't you have Cheekbone here? Because if I'm not the one constantly in their face, it's definitely easier on building those relationships. But then yeah, so one of the critical pieces for me was learning what not to say in order that our next generations have large opportunities.
I love that. I think a lot about, you know, how we all of us get to be here today, and because we stand on the shoulders of others, and in particular for us, for women who have come before us, and how we're now the shoulders that you know, those that will follow will stand on. So yeah, that's beautiful. Michelle, leadership.
Thank you, Lori. I think I definitely resonate with a lot of what the other ladies have said on the panel here, but I actually did have an aha moment there, Lori. So we were coming back from Waskasiu. I was kind of a little bit bored in the car, and I said, you know what? I want to do something for myself. I don't want to work for someone for the rest of my life. And it was it was a hard time personally. My daughter was in the hospital. She was ill. The day after she got out, my mother had a heart attack, a 7 bypass. She made it, thank goodness. And then my father ended up passing away, and this was all during COVID. And so at that time, it kind of made me realize, you know what, there is something more to than just working in an organization that, you know, it was a great organization, but then it just started to not meet my values. And so I started thinking, I need to do something different. What kind of a leader, what kind of an organization do I want to go and work for? And I actually came to work for FHQ Developments, and it was a great 3 years while I was at this organization. And at the time, you know, I said yes to almost everything. So my CEO at the time, he gave me a lot of opportunities to get out there and be in those spaces where there weren't other Indigenous people, there weren't other Indigenous women. And, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would not be sitting up here. I would not be in rooms with CEOs and deputy ministers and things like that. But now, Dana, you had talked about hierarchy, and I know in a lot of your organizations, there is the hierarchy, right? So there is a president, a CEO, there's a whole chain of how things work in organizations. And for myself now, one thing that I had to do is I really had to say, if I'm going to be a leader, and it's kind of hard to think of that of yourself as a leader, but once you hear it so many times, it starts to kind of kick in, and you think, well, maybe I am, you know, creating a path for other people, other Indigenous youth and Indigenous women to do what I'm doing. But, you know, with hierarchy, when I go into a room with someone, it's really just, you know, whether you're the CEO, whether you are the premier, you know, it's just you're another person. And so for me, a lot of people, I have to give them that message and say, it doesn't matter who you're in the room with. You know what your values are. You know what you have to bring to the table. And so that's what I think of every time I go in. And I also make sure that you know, I'm seen in the room, because I find a lot of times when you're an Indigenous woman in the room and you're the only person, a lot of times you get ignored, you know, by males or by people in other, you know, other positions. And so for myself, I find that I kind of kill them with kindness and expertise and professionalism. And so I show these people that, you know what, I do deserve to be in this room. I am as qualified or more qualified to be here. And one of the things that I try to do is, if I'm in a room full of people I haven't met, or, you know, at a some kind of a breakfast, I'll make sure if there's an opportunity to ask questions, that I'll get up there and, you know, I'll introduce who I am. This is where I'm from. And I'll ask the hard questions, because I know that if I'm thinking it, other people are thinking it as well. So I guess a lot of it was a fake it until you make it, you know, try and kick that imposter syndrome to the curb. I have a theme song that I think of, you know, before doing something. It's a Sia song. And then the other thing is, I read a book called Do It Scared. And it That's kind of like the fake it until you make it. But it was, I think I read the first 2 chapters, and I do like to call that life changing because I make sure that everybody knows that they have to go in and read that. And I guess it's just determination, saying yes to as many things as you can. And for me, focusing on Indigenous youth, as Cook and Brenda mentioned, they're not our future, they are our today. And so I do a lot to make sure that I can be a role model for Indigenous youth and get them into those leadership positions.
Oh, I so relate to that. I remember as the associate vice president holding this inaugural position for the University of Regina. I remember thinking the first time I walk into that meeting in that boardroom as part of the exec team, that will set the tone for how they're going to engage with me or what they're going to expect from me down the road. And one of the ways I do that is I kind of trick myself in reminding myself that, as you know, as my auntie says, it's like, you know, if I sit in that room and I'm quiet, it's probably not going to harm me, but it's going to harm the next person, Indigenous person who comes into that room and, is using their voice, or it will harm Indigenous students. So sometimes I trick myself that it's not for me that I'm opening my mouth, but it's, to make sure that I'm doing good while I'm in that space for those that will follow. So thank you. Now we've all kind of touched on a few barriers. Are there any other really specific ones that come to mind on that, like barriers to your leadership and to your development? And Jen, maybe we'll start with you on that if there's one that comes to mind.
Yeah, when I think of development, I think the barrier for me was in my personal journey, right? I've really been open and honest that cheekbone exists because of major transformations in my life and a lot of things that I've had to overcome and go through. But facing them head on and actually going through them and being working on myself early on in the business, I remember getting advice that I really should be working harder on myself than the business as well. If you're going to be a good leader, you need to take care of you before you go on and do anything else. And so I've really paid attention to that advice, and I feel like learning and understanding generational trauma has just helped me become a better leader and heal and show that it is possible for all the next generations or anyone who may still be struggling or suffering.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Michelle.
Yeah, I mentioned a couple barriers already, and one of them is, being it's kind of a man's club, and we are trying to change that now. I guess one of my barriers was I always thought I wasn't Indigenous enough to do the work that I'm doing. Because we're an RCMP family and we grew up in different towns, I was always the new kid. And I thought, well, I didn't grow up on Cowsas. I didn't grow up in my culture. I've never been to ceremony. But then I start thinking about, I grew all these other values from my dad, from being in an RCMP family, and those mean just as much to me, and I can learn my culture now. And then I always think there are so many different types of Indigenous people. And so this is just who I am. So I thought it was a barrier, but it definitely is not. Let me just check my notes here. I think that was probably one of the biggest ones. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Dana, I know you had a couple you wanted to mention.
Yes, I do have a few. I could go on, but I'll keep it short. One, which has been mentioned by Michelle, and I think implied by all three of us, is imposter syndrome. I mean, even me being invited to this panel, I mean, I had to take a few days to sit on it. I'm sure Justine wasn't happy about that, but it was eventually my husband who said, no, you should do it, you should do it, you should go. So I think that imposter syndrome of not maybe seeing ourselves as in this space or maybe accepted in this space, because, when we look around, it's especially in the organizations I've been in, most of the leadership positions, male, non-Indigenous. And there's this one conversation I remember early in my career. I was having an annual career review. I think we've all gone through those conversations, and we had to write up a bit about the work we had done in the past year. And the kind of older non-Indigenous male person that I was reporting to at that time, he kind of opened up and said, I have a problem with kind of what you wrote up. You said we a lot. You didn't, take claim for all this work. And I'm like, well, I didn't do it on my own. We did it as a collective. Everything that we've done, in the workplace has been collaborative. I don't feel comfortable taking ownership of these things. And I really started to see the differences in kind of Western Eurocentric values and our Indigenous values, and how, what our teachings are and how we function in our families and our communities. And that's been, I think, a huge barrier for me, is that, in leadership, kind of if you Google leadership, it's about who's in charge, it's about, the top of the pyramid, who's at the top. And, I think the way I've been raised is there isn't that hierarchy. And we've talked about this before. And, I struggle with that. And I do think we do need to work together and kind of break down these walls of, how much are we getting paid and what level position are you and all of these different things. And, start making a space for all people to have a voice and to be able to incorporate, our authentic Indigenous selves in the workplace. And I don't always feel safe to be my authentic self in the workplace. And that's a barrier as well. I don't feel like I can truly be myself as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous woman, and truly share my views and perspectives, because there have been times that I haven't felt safe. And at one point, I felt so unsafe that I refused to come into the workplace. So that was really problematic. And oh gosh, there's so many barriers that we could talk about. But those are some that really come to mind for me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And very, very real. And I think, Michelle, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I did want to add one thing, a bit of a controversial topic here, but I do find that one of the barriers is racism happening. And, a lot of people say we have zero tolerance policies, we have DEI strategies, but really at the end of the day, it's the people that are walking in the front lines that things are happening to. We developed a really good strategy to employ Indigenous people throughout all levels of organizations. And we were so proud of this, working with a really large organization. There were 4 women in the picture here with this company talking about our partnership. And the keyboard warriors came out. So it was a racist comment. My peer Amy and I were actually on our phones for a couple of days consistently blocking people who were saying poor comments. It was not responding to things, of course. You've got to take the high road on that. But it is a lot of racism. If you go into rooms, again, you feel that tension. But I think as a leader, for me, I kind of have a bit of a shield on, because I'm really focused on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And so if those folks who have those types of views come out, for me, it doesn't bother me, but that's why I stay in those spaces, because for other people, they might not be as strong to do it that way.
Yeah, thank you for that. And not to delve too much into the topic, but it is important, I think, to note that as women and for somebody who does a lot of media work myself, the way the attacks can come out, and they do become gendered and can also become, just in comments, very sexually violent as well, which is just an added layer that as women, and that add in the racism that can occur in that realm. Now, I know all of you have really strive to also build Indigenous leaders. So not just that you're leading, but that you're working to build other Indigenous leaders. Could you talk a little bit about like how in your work that you uplift intentionally other Indigenous leaders? I get to pick who we're starting with. Let's start with Michelle this time.
You saw the big smile on my face, eh? So I guess one of the things that I do is I really try to talk to as many Indigenous youth as I can. When you go into a room, I think the biggest thing is career awareness. People, even in professional positions, they don't understand what they can do. So when I'm in a room talking with Indigenous youth and I say, do you know that you can do this? Do you know that you can be in this career? And they say, what? I had no idea I could. And then, you try to build up that confidence and say, you are an Indigenous person. You can do anything that you want in your life. And so you want to start young and start building that confidence. The other thing that I do is I work with passive Indigenous candidates. So a lot of times, my story is pretty unique. I left a permanent HR manager position for a temporary HR generalist job. But I knew that I wanted to, make a different career path there. So I always think, well, if I'm able to do something like that and, totally change my personal and professional career in a couple of years, I can do that for other passive Indigenous candidates who might be sitting in a role and just not knowing that there are other opportunities out there. And then, of course, changing organizations.
Absolutely. Dana.
Right, so the question was
just about, I know that you all work to uplift other Indigenous leaders and to help move others through that. So could you speak to a little bit of the ways in which you do that?
a lot of it is, I guess, sharing my experiences with others. And I think through doing that, especially those who are younger than me, and sometimes it's not always those who are younger than me, but especially being in an educational institution with my students, with some of our other staff at the university, people outside of the university, I find a lot of people are coming to me and speaking to me and looking for advice and for guidance. And one, I'm an ear for them. And two, I share my experiences. And unfortunately, part of that is preparing them for reality, in that, we just talked about the barriers and talking to them about, these are things you might experience. And, when they do, come talk to me. Let's figure out how we can work through this together. Like, don't let that bring you down and completely break you down, and sometimes we do have to walk away. We have to walk away from organizations. We don't have a choice, or they lay us off or let us go, whatever. Sometimes it's out of our hands too. But I really try to build up the strength of, one, the next generation and of other women around me. We have a very supportive community. Even Michelle and I this morning, we're kind of hyping each other up for the panel, and we're like, yeah, we got this, we can do this. So relying on each other is something, so it's not always about those who are younger than us, than the youth, but it's everyone around me. I try to be that mentor. And like I said, I've been privileged enough to get into certain spaces because of my education and my upbringing. And, I really do think it's because I am fair skinned as well. And I, again, try to be that voice for others. And I think others see that and kind of gravitate towards me. And I'm always happy to help other people. And sometimes to my detriment, because that's not always recognized in workplaces, especially when we think about what did you do in the past year? Sometimes all this informal mentorship, doesn't help the balance sheet. And especially being an educator and in a faculty role, it doesn't really fit into my CV. So, whereas others are doing more formal mentorship on committees and all these other things, I'm spending a lot of time with students, with others in the workplace, with others in the community, but that doesn't really count towards anything that I'm doing. It counts to me, and I advocate for it to count when it comes to my job and what I'm evaluated on in terms of my work performance. But that's something that really needs to change, because as Indigenous people, as women, we're always supporting those around us, and we spend a lot of time doing that, but it's not always recognized and appreciated and valued in our workplaces.
Absolutely, that emotional labor, and I've often said it's our non-Indigenous counterparts might put on their CV that they came to watch an Indigenous women's leadership panel as part of their professional, cross-cultural development or something. But where do we get to put on our CVs that we spoke to a dozen non-Indigenous folks today and help them not be so racist? That doesn't look good on a CV, I guess. But it's important, I think, for HR departments to to consider some of that. I often tell my supervisor, who's the president of the university, and my executive team, and they know this, that while I'm leading the university on this path of Indigenous strategic engagement, I'm also living it within my community, and living it as the ups and downs come, and the experiences are very real, and we're living them as we're leading, and I think that I hope people do notice that in our organizations, if we're working in mainstream organizations, for sure. Jen, mentoring, you got a whole team over there now.
Yeah, we have a small team of people that work at Cheekbone Beauty, but I think a lot of the work that I do in terms of mentorship is outside our organization. I'm a mentor in so many different business forums for women, and obviously I seek out Indigenous entrepreneurs to work with on that path, which is always very exciting. And then I personally answer every email that an Indigenous youth sends, whether they're usually a student, sometimes even in high school or university, that they're seeking advice and want my time. And we do whatever I can to fit that in my schedule, because it's part of the reason why our brand exists. And personally, that's part of the work that makes me feel the most gratified, is supporting them on their journeys. And then we also, as an organization, I think this is one of the things, at Cheekbone Beauty that I'm so proud of, is our scholarship fund. So in 2021, so every purchase from Cheekbone Beauty, we're a B Corp certified company. So that means we give 2% of our annual revenues go back to causes that matter to us. One being 1% for the planet, and the other 1% of funding goes to our scholarship fund. And we started the fund in partnership with Inspire. And in 2021, we were able to give out 1 scholarship. The next year we gave out 5. And this year, this week, we'll be announcing the 10 scholarships that we're giving out. So we've been able to grow that over the years, which is something that I'm so proud of. When I had that original dream about building this cosmetics company, it was with this idea of using a portion of profits always to support something. And if you'd follow the Cheekbone Beauty story, it would definitely always relate it to education, because I knew how important that was for our community to get educated and be empowered by education, because then who would know the opportunities would be endless for them. And I just want to share quickly, I had the most incredible experience in Sephora. In June of last year, we were doing these event campaigns, and I'm with the Sephora clients, the typical makeup lover putting on blush, but something really special happened. This family had come in. I was at the Eaton Center location, and it was an Anishinaabe family, and this little girl was about 12, and she was with her little brother and her mom and her auntie. And I just had such an incredible moment with them. And she already had this confidence that I never had at 12 years old. She was telling me about her TikTok life and how she was getting famous there, and she had to shut it down. And then her brother's like, no, you're not. And they were just having the sweetest time. But I drove home that night, and it was for the first time, I think, in building this brand that I actually felt why representation mattered so much, like on this visceral level, because I thought about those 2 kids, and I'm like, wow, when I was 12, I never had anyone to look up to. And these 2 kids just met a woman that looks like them, that comes from the same community that they come from, that owns a brand available in an organization like Sephora, which is the largest beauty retailer in the entire world. And we're the first Indigenous company to be ever working with Sephora. And I thought, how powerful that was, and how representation really does matter. And I think as human beings, it's on this unconscious level that you have no idea what it will do for you when you see yourself in places. So all of the women, Indigenous women in leadership roles, have such a big job, because we're the ones that are here giving this path for our youth to think about what opportunities are available for them. And I think that just being in these positions provides so much mentorship and leadership.
Absolutely. What a beautiful story. And just to wrap up here, we got maybe just a couple minutes left. Any final comments? It could be on what you want to give a shout out for to inspire people, although that was very inspiring, Jen. Michelle, Dana, one more thing you want to add? What you would tell somebody? Your last message?
I'm just waiting for it to turn on. Oh gosh, so many messages. Just don't give up, I guess, be strong. And, for me, strong mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, I really rely on, my culture and our ceremonies, sorry, and our teachings as well, and listening to our elders and knowledge keepers. And that keeps me strong. And through ceremonies, that's where I get my strength. And it's, that's what's been it for me, because it's very draining to be in these colonial spaces and spaces that aren't designed for us to succeed. And we have to find those healthy outlets and ways to keep us strong. And and don't give up. And reach out, find me on LinkedIn if anyone needs to chat. I'm happy to chat, and I'm sure Michelle and Jen are as well. We're always happy to answer emails, phone calls, even if it takes up time in our day and pulls us away from projects. I will still do it.
Wonderful. Michelle?
Okay, I guess it would be to definitely, stay laser focused on what your goals are, why you're there, why you're doing the things that you want to do in life here. Will be my other thing here. Say yes, even if you're scared. Go out and do it. You're going to feel so good after. Even before I do speakings, I always say, well, am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to engage the crowd? And so just be confident in your abilities, but also don't burn yourself out, because there aren't as many Indigenous female leaders out there. And so we kind of feel like we want to do it all. We want to be in every space. We don't sleep very often. If we wake up and have an idea, we just keep going with it. So take time for yourself. Like you said, mental health is very important. And so make sure that you're tracking that as well with your work and your life balance.
Wonderful. Jen, did you have any final thoughts? Or
I think all of like echoing the same thing, like just not giving up. I always say if you don't give up, then you cannot fail. Like it just doesn't happen that way, right? The only time the failure happens is when we give up on something. And that reassuring, I think the hardest part of this was always that belief that I had the ability. You know, many of us were raised to think we didn't have the skills to do all these incredible things. And I don't know when the shift happened, but it happened at some point where I was like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And just recognizing that it is possible, and we might not have all the appropriate skills or tools we need, but you can certainly find people to support that. I always share this as I failed grade 9 science, and now I own a lab and employ scientists in our lab. So when you're an entrepreneur, you can pay really smart people to do the things you don't know how to do, and just be consistent.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge with us and guidance. And I think I turn it over to our MCs now, I think. But thank you all very, very much. I've really, it's been an honor.
Oh, I'm gonna flip a couple pages. Thank you, Lori Campbell, and panelists Jennifer Harper, Dana Carrier, and Michelle Brooks. We appreciate you sharing your experience as leaders and giving us insight into the future. Your discussion has been nothing short of inspirational.
So before we continue into our next presentations, we're going to take a quick health break. So please take this time to stretch, grab a refreshment and a snack, and prepare your mind for even more inspiration. We'll return at 10:45, where we will then hear from our keynote speaker.
No, we'll come back
Oh,
at about
never mind.
11:05 if that's
Never mind.
okay. Sorry.
Didn't even look at the